Hi. At some point in everyone's early life, they reach a crossroads. They're not really an adult, but they're not really a child anymore either. In my case, this happened in the early 60s. If you were lucky enough, like me, to be a lower middle class person, your parents probably gave you some pocket money. But it wasn't enough anymore. You needed cash. Many young people at that time turned to looking for a Saturday job, and there were lots of retail outlets where you could work on Saturdays. That was their busy day. If you were smart and clean cut, you could probably work in a bookshop or a bakery. If you were a little bit more rough and ready, you might gravitate towards the greengrocers or the ironmongers. But I was in the middle somewhere, I guess, and I worked in Woolworths. Now, Woolworths or Woolies has gone now, but at that time they had premises in almost every proper high street. They started in the US in the 20s, I think, and in the Depression era as a 5 and 10 cent store, the modern equivalent of a pound shop. You could go in there without very much money and buy something. By the 60s, they had evolved into a kind of local department store. They had hundreds, thousands of lines that they sold. There's all sorts of things, food, household stuff, electrical goods, clothing even, and many other things. On the shop floor there were 9 counters, each counter dedicated to a particular type of line, like sweets or cigarettes or something. And the counters were rectangular in shape, and they had a kind of a little run in the middle where the staff could move up and down and serve customers. And there were more retail stuff, more selling spaces around on the walls, all around the shop floor. Upstairs there was a storeroom, a stock room, a canteen. You could get basic food like eggs and bacon and sausages and stuff like that, and a cup of tea and our tea breaks. We had tea breaks in those days. And to the side there was a loading bay where lorries would pull in and could be unloaded directly onto trolleys, which we'd take up to the storeroom. In the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of pilfering going on, a lot of theft. I guess it was a hangover from rationing and the war, and many people honed their thieving skills in Woolworths, which was an open store, and it was easy to walk around and take things off the counters. And yeah, I have to admit, this is where I first experienced that as well. And let me tell you, stealing is a roller coaster. It's an emotional nightmare. First of all, you have to overcome the fear and dread of being caught. But there's something in that shop that you want, and you don't have the money to pay for it. So eventually you screw up the courage and you go in there. Your heart's pounding, but you have to act normal. You walk around casually looking at things. You don't want to focus on the thing that you're actually there to steal. eventually, you come by that, and when nobody's looking, you palm it out of the off the counter into your pocket, or be a jumper, or I don't know, somewhere. And then, of course, your head's exploding. I mean, your legs are telling you to run, but you can't. You've got to carry on. You've got to stay cool. You walk around the shop some more. You pretend to look at things. You're in a turmoil, but you've got to look normal. And eventually, and quietly and slowly, you head for the door. You leave the shop. And when you get outside, it's a huge rush of euphoria and happiness, relief, and then the guilt and remorse kick in, and you realise the danger you put yourself in. And of course, I was lucky. I was lucky, really, that I got this out of my system at an early age, about 7 or so, and I couldn't handle. I just couldn't handle the pressure. There were about 40 people who worked at woolworths in those days. 35 of them were women and girls, and there were 3 men and us 2 Saturday boys. I was never able to take advantage of this gender gap. There were girls there, Saturday girls there as well, who were probably about the same age as me, but I think girls at that age are a little bit more mature than boys are, at least more mature than this boy was. I guess I could blush and stammer hello in my broken adolescent voice, but that was about it. I think John, the other Saturday boy, was a little bit more advanced in that respect, but not much. So there was a whole sort of female society going on there that with which I had almost no interaction. Of the 5 male members of staff, there was me and John, of course. There was the storeman, a man of few words, who wore a brown cotton coat and spent most of his time counting things. Didn't have much to do with him. And there was the manager, of course, who rarely came out of his office. You didn't really see him. He was probably in there counting the money that passed through. But the only time we interacted with him was when he came out of his office at closing time. He had the keys and he was there to lock up the shop and close the shop. He used to go around, make sure that we were sweeping up and tidying up properly, ready for the next day. One thing I remember about him was that he had a boss eye or a cross eye, or maybe even one false eye, I'm not sure. But in either case, he looked as though he seemed to be looking in 2 directions at once. And you could never be really sure that he wasn't looking at you. Anyway, the little sight he did have was good, because he'd always spot a dog end on the floor if you missed it. Anyway, the other male, of course, was the deputy manager. My job and John's was to do whatever the deputy manager told us to do. He virtually ran the shop. And he was a sharp young Cockney man who'd done well for himself. He loved Woolworths. He loved Woolworths. one time I remember he pulled a wad of notes out of his pocket, pound notes out of his pocket, to show us what he'd got, you know, and we were impressed. But anyway, yeah, our jobs might be to unload lorries that came into the loading bay and put the stuff on trolleys, take it up to the storeroom, or to run a shopping list up to the storeroom and collect stuff that was needed on the shop floor. Oh yeah, one of our jobs was to load the cardboard baler. I mean, as you can imagine, the uh, deliveries and so on, it generated a lot of waste paper and cardboard. Everything came in a cardboard box. And we had a baling machine on the first floor, and we'd lob any sort of paper or cardboard into the hopper. And when the hopper was full, we'd bring the cage down around the machine and press a button. And a giant hydraulic ram would come down and squash the waste paper into a useful bale, which could then be kept somewhere until it was collected by a waste paper company, and took it away and probably recycled it into some more cardboard boxes. Sometimes when I've been working there a bit longer and I've got the hang of things, I worked on the electrical counter, and I was good at that. I think I used to be able to. Well, there were hundreds of items for sale on that counter. You know, bulbs and fuses and plugs and all sorts of things. And people would come to the counter and say, "Well, I'll have two of those, three of those, and a dozen of that other." And of course, I got in the habit. I was able to add up what they were buying in my head and keep a running total of what they owed. And of course, in those days, not only were we working in pounds, shillings, and pence, which was intrinsically more complicated than decimal currency, but also they hadn't invented things like barcodes, and the till couldn't do much adding up for you. It was just a machine, a mechanical machine, and you just rang up once, and it couldn't even tell you what change you had to give. So that was quite a useful skill to be able to do that, and one which I used, which came in handy in later life. But of course, I developed other habits which were not really quite so useful. There was a woman there who worked there who'd been there for decades, decades and decades, and she was retiring, and they were going to organise a little goodbye party for her to be held in the canteen upstairs. And to fund that party, everybody chipped in a few coppers from their wages every week. It wasn't much, but I think in my case it was 6 pence a week. Other people probably gave more, but over time it accumulated, and it was quite a lot of money. Anyway, come the party, I guess there was a cake and probably a few packets of crisps, but most of the money had been spent on drink, and there was loads of it. There was bottles of rum and gin and whiskey and sherry and all kinds of stuff, port. And I know everyone, I guess they had a bit of cake and a speech or two, and then everybody got drunk, totally drunk. in some cases obscenely drunk. And of course, I was 14 years old. Of course, I'd never been drunk before, but wow, I got drunk that day. And of course, when you're 14, you're fresh and fit. You didn't have I didn't have a hangover the next day. I felt great. I thought, yeah, I'm probably good at this drinking stuff. I give it some more. And anyway, one way or another, that was where I learned. That was where I had my first experience of work and drink, and both of those have sort of cast a shadow over my life ever since. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said that work was the curse of the drinking classes. But of course, it cuts both ways. Anyway, that was my first job.